Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be going through the 10 essential heavy metal albums. What do we mean by essential? Say you've got a record collection and you're not really a heavy metal fan, but you thought, I should have some albums in my collection to represent that genre. And you think to yourself, what would be the 10 best albums to have that would represent that genre? Well, this would be my suggestion of the 10 to get. These albums are chosen because they're all, in my opinion, brilliant albums. They represent a certain aspect of heavy metal, and they cover a lot of the main bands, and they cover a lot of the main bands that were innovative within that genre. In some cases, I won't be going for the most innovative album by that band. I will be going for the album which I think represents heavy metal the best and the genre. It's sort of the classic album, if that makes sense. Secondly, shall we now define what we mean by heavy metal? Well, when I was a nipper, we didn't used to call it heavy metal. We used to call it heavy rock. And heavy rock include bands like AC/DC and Deep Purple and Nazareth and bands like that. On this video, we're going to try and narrow it down, but we're not going to go right down to what some people define as heavy metal, which is the sort of post-thrash metal bands. You know, I think if I talk to my kids about heavy metal, they think it was all screaming, although we've got some of the screamy stuff on here as well. So there's a certain thickness and heaviness. There's a certain propensity towards singing about, you know, the devil or dark, horrific things or crime. It's that genre. So I think we know where we are. So should we just crack on then and get straight in? So at number 10, I have the dodgiest choice on this list. I didn't know whether to put it on. This is the outlier. Often I will put an outlier in, because if you're going to have the 10 albums, you don't want every single one in your collection to be just your standard heavy metal album that everyone is expecting. You need one outlier, and this is the one. At number 10, I have got Sacrificed by Praxis. Right, so Praxis are an avant-garde jazz noise dub group formed by BILL LASWELL, the great producer that emerged in the late 70s with his band Material, and was sort of skirting between hip-hop, avant-garde jazz, and noise. You know, he had a free jazz band called Last Exit that really explored the sort of heavy metal end of free jazz. Now, the reason I put this one on the list is because heavy metal is so far-reaching and it influences so many different styles of music. And this happens to be one of the most brutal albums you'll ever hear. Now, this album is the second album by Praxis. Praxis was formed around about 1992, I think. And it brought together various disparate elements in. Something that BILL LASWELL loved to do, bringing different elements from different genres. So the original Praxis, I think, had Brain, who was the drummer originally with Limbo Maniacs, and then he joined Primus. It had got Bootsy Collins on bass. It had got a guy called AF Next Man Flip, I think, who was on turntables. We had that hip-hop influence. You got Bernie Worrell, also from Parliament Funkadelic, and you got the incredible Buckethead on guitar. And the first album is very disparate. There's all sorts of influences on. On the second album, Sacrifice, they bring in John Zorn, the avant-garde free jazz saxophone player that had got famous in the 80s with these mad cut-up stuffs. And he himself was also exploring the netherworld between free jazz and heavy metal. And also Mick Harris, who was the drummer in the original Napalm Death and had recently departed Napalm Death to do his own project Scorn, which was more of a dub reggae thing. This album really has a lot of disparate influences. It covers a lot of ground. There's dub aspects to this, there's funk aspects to this. But when I was teaching music, and I would have loads of kids come into the classroom, I would be facing these metal kids, and my job would be to bust them outside of that genre. They hated jazz, they hated dub, they hated all this stuff. They just wanted to hear the heaviest thing on the planet. Well, if you put Sacrificed on and that first track opens up, you will hear one of the heaviest tracks that you have ever heard. Brutal blast beats combined with chainsaws careering down each side of the stereo spectrum. Buckethead's insanely fast guitar looping around these insane riffs, and it's just like just a couple of minutes of just the most intense stuff. And then it drops into, the second track comes in, it's got a lot more of a sort of classic rock, boogie type of approach, and then it drops into a dub reggae thing, and it veers in and out. And what I found is my students who are the metal fans, they could not deny this album. They would go, oh my God, what is this? And they'd all be reaching to get it. And by getting them to start listening to this album, they then had to sort of accept all the other stuff that was in there, and that would bust them out as they start to realise that the heaviest music is the music that blows your mind, and there's more than one way to blow your mind. So that's what I've got at number 10, is Sacrificed by Praxis. If you are interested in the extremes of avant-garde jazz and metal and scream and all that stuff, check out Praxis, because they did some incredible stuff all the way through the 90s. And the last album they did, which was called Profanation, it features a whole bunch of stars from like System of a Down. I think Iggy Pop's on there. It's an incredible album, really incredible album. And Bill Laswell is a very interesting musician, one of the great musicians of the last 40 odd years, 45 years really, an absolute giant of modern music. And more recently, Bill's been suffering with some illness, and now he produced a lot of big albums, and he produced a lot of hit records, including Rocket for Herbie Hancock, so he must have made the money. But this man has ploughed his money back into his productions, and through his productions and hiring musicians from the worlds of avant-garde jazz and hip-hop musicians, world musicians, he was actually able to sustain the careers of certain musicians, especially the guys in Parliament Funkadelic. And so this guy deserves, I mean, if I ruled the world, I would give Bill Laswell a grant, and I would look after him like a national treasure. I really would. But I will try, if I remember, to dig out the link to his page, the GoFundMe page, just to fund him, because he's not well at the moment. So I mentioned that. Now, on this album, as I said, on drums, we have the great Mick Harris. Now, Mick Harris got known as the drummer in Napalm Death. Napalm Death were a band from Birmingham, the same as many of the classic heavy metal bands, definitely 3 on this list. And they continued on being a pioneer in this genre called heavy metal. Now, if you've never been to Birmingham in the West Midlands, and I have, but if you haven't, it's the centre of sort of the industrial heartland of the UK. You've got the Black Country next to it, and it's bleak and industrial, right? And there's a certain gruff sense of humour that goes with this that, for me, it embodies itself in heavy metal. And this is where Napalm Death come out. So Napalm Death are a bunch of kids, I think they went to like Solihull High School, and they formed this band. And at that point, underneath the burgeoning thrash metal scene, there's this very extreme metal that's coming out, you know, allied to punk rock, very countercultural. And the guys in Napalm Death are interested in that, and there's a number of musicians forming around them. They get a deal in the mid-80s. They got featured on a television program in the mid-80s, which was looking at heavy metal. It also looked at Metallica. And I remember this documentary coming out, and you saw the guys from Napalm Death sat in, I think, Shane Embry's bedroom, you know, chatted about what they wanted to do. Now, Shane Embry joined, I think, on the second album, and he is now the longest serving member of Napalm Death. But also Shane is a very good friend of mine, and I talk to him quite a lot. And in talking to Shane, I've been able to get a much better picture about this movement that was going on. And so I'm no expert on Napalm Death, right? But there's 2 albums to pick from here. I would say it's either going to be their second album, which I think is called Scum, and it might be their first album. The first album is famous because it's got the shortest track in history, which is just over a second long, and it's called You Suffer. So when they came out, they were making brutal, short, in-your-face, screaming metal. It was the extreme of the extreme. It put a mark in the sand. Scum came out, was a classic of that. And then in 1991, I think, they made an album called Harmony and Corruption. And here they took, and this is the genius, and people, there's so many people out saying, oh, you should have put Scum down, it should have been one of the early albums, it should have been, because you've got to have those like really short, like 20-second tracks of them screaming, because that's what they're famous for. But the thing is that after they'd made a mark in that, they could have lasted 5 minutes, but they didn't, because they consolidated that without what's the word? Bowing down to commerciality, without going against their initial artistic intentions. And on Harmony Corruption, you see grindcore or metalcore or whatever you want to call this, and I've got no clear idea which one's what. I think they're grindcore, aren't they? That's not what they invented. But you see that consolidate into a form which is actually artistically viable. And from this point on, Napalm Death actually have a huge influence on a whole host of musics outside. In some cases, direct influence. I know Shane quite well, and Shane is a musical visionary. He's listening to, Cardiacs. He's listening to, like, avant-garde electronic music. He's pulling from all these different areas and was actually drawing musicians to him and then selling these music to these bands. And so part of the thing that we see with the Mr. Bungle and Praxis and all that thing that was swilling around in the early 90s that sort of drew me back into heavy metal actually has its roots in these brummy blokes like Shane and Napalm Death. So that's what I've got at number 9 is Harmony and Corruption. I've really got to get Shane on the channel. We've been chatting about doing a project together for a long time now, but he's always out on tour. The reason he's always out on tour is because this band have been going for 40 odd years. Shane's been in the band since '88, so what's that? That's like 37 years. It's nearly 40 years. It's incredible that this band is still going, and the reason is because they represent something. They represent something in heavy metal, which is very important. Right, shall we move on to number 8? At number 8, I have Pantera's Vulgar Display of Power. One of my favourite heavy metal albums. Now, why is this on? Because I love it. It's the post-thrash metal conglomeration of grunge meets thrash metal and going back to sort of stoner rock, which bands like Soundgarden sort of re-unearthed from the original Black Sabbath, which of course we're going to get to in a minute. So Vulgar Display of Power by Pantera is just so unbelievably brilliant. Pantera actually started out at the tail end of the sort of whole hair metal thing that was happening in the 80s. I've tried to represent that here with a certain album. But at that point, metal had become very showy and everyone's got lipstick and makeup and it was all, all that sort of Kiss-derived nonsense. And with the advent of the grunge bands, we saw that influence metal. Now, I haven't really put any grunge bands on this list because I think it's pushing the... If I were to let them in, then we start to let sort of Deep Purple albums in and Rainbow albums, and it all starts to go a certain way because it's just on the edge. I think Soundgarden could be definitely an Alice in Chains. So they could well have been on this list, but they're not. So Pantera, then, they tighten their sound up and they go for this sort of stoner thrash metal. Now, for those of you, and I count myself included in this, for those of you who can't quite take the screaming, it's a little bit like the comment that was made about, John Coltrane and Wayne Shorter in the 1960s when somebody said it sounds like they're playing scrambled eggs. And I think Art Blakey turned around and said, yeah, but it's the way they're scrambling those eggs. And it's the same thing with singers that scream. And I think Phil Anselmo from Pantera is one of the greatest screamers. And these songs have strong hooks and melodies, and yet it's so dark. The production's incredible on here. The band's incredible. Vinnie Paul, this is like the last hurrah for real drumming before the computers came in. It's brutal, but that's a real drum sound. It's brutal, scooped EQ, great big clicky bass drums, but it's really being played. And you feel like the band's playing in front of you. It has a vibe to it that's absolutely incredible. And then Dimebag Darrell's guitar solos are incredible. He's influenced from that whole 80s guitar thing that's happened with Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. But the guy also really does not, he hasn't got that theoretical basis, so he's winging it. Almost in a sort of free jazz, Audette Coleman type of thing. I absolutely love Dimebag solos. I think they're incredible. So that's what I've got at number 8 is Pantera, Vulgar Display of Power. Let's move to number 7, right? We need to represent the thrash bands. So in the 80s, and I believe this grew out of the sort of technical end of the LA music scene, all those GIT types that were in, you know, LA in the mid 80s, and then the new wave of British heavy metal. And certain bands started to push the speed, and you got the blast beats and all that thrash metal thing. And you sort of get a whole bunch of bands emerge, and I love them all, and I want to represent them on this list. So obviously we've got Metallica, we've got Anthrax, we've got Megadeth, we've got Sepultura perhaps, and Slayer. Now, I think the definitive 80s thrash metal album, I've actually got 2 here, but the other one's so important, it's up higher on the list. So as we get in this list, you'll start to go, I can see where Andy's going with this now. So at number 7, I've got Rain in Blood by Slayer. The great Dave Lombardo on drums. For me, the other groups like Anthrax, Megadeth, and Metallica all have a certain character. All of them have got their own character, which is what makes them brilliant. Megadeth had a sort of quite conceptual, proggy character going on. Anthrax have got a sort of quirky, quite humorous characteristic, and they're pulling from hip hop, and you know, and they've got that going on. Metallica have this sort of much more sort of classic rock almost take on thrash metal. Slayer are almost like you're straight down the line thrash metal band, and they do everything that you expect. The riffs on this album are so heavy, it's so dark, the production's brilliant. And also, I have to say, in terms of the virtuosity levels, obviously, you know, Megadeth had Marty Friedman. What an incredible guitar player. I love Charlie Benante's drumming in Anthrax. He was my go-to thrash metal drummer. Metallica were an iconic band, but never really had quite the virtuosity of these other bands. Slayer did. You know, Slayer did. So this is why I've got Slayer at number 7 on my list. And don't want this to be a long video, so I'm going to move on. So I hope you don't mind me moving on. I'll have a swig of my coffee because I'm doing a lot of talking. It's going darker here. I'm actually filming this on the first day of 2025. Obviously, my videos are delayed, so you'll be watching an interview with Paul Wurtico on the first day, and you'll see I'm about a week ahead, which is quite good at the moment. And so I am actually wishing you all a happy new year. You're like over a week in now, aren't you? So I hope nothing bad's happened in the interim. You know, usually something does at the beginning of the new year. We want a good year, good new year, don't we? Right, so at number 6, build up the tension. At number 6, I have Judas Priest. Now, which album are we going to go for Judas Priest? Well, I could have gone for Rock and Roll, their very first album when they launched onto the scene. But at that point, they're still sort of just like a post-Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple band, you know, with a little bit more screaming going on. Or I could have, what's the next one? Sad Wings of Destiny. And that's where their style changes. And then they consolidate that on Sin After Sin, which is my favourite Judas Priest album. If I was picking my Desert Island disc, it would be Sin After Sin. Because for me, Simon Phillips just ups the ante and invents the sort of heavy metal double bass drum genre. But when I first got into what was called heavy rock in 1980, there was a number of tracks that drew me to this style. The first would be Rainbow, All Night Long, and then Whitesnake brought out Fall for Your Loving. Now, you may say they're not really heavy metal bands, but they were the ones that switched me on and maybe me realise there's other music going on apart from just Visage and the whole new romantic and electronic thing that was going on at the time that all my friends are into. So my ears sparked those 2 singles. They came out sort of running sort of February, March. This is the key point in my life, is those February, March of 1980. Eventually Ace of Spades would come out by Motörhead, and then I was sold. I was a metaler, and that's what I was into, and that made me start playing the guitar, playing the drums. But in April, Judas Priest brought out United, and I think United, for me, I saw them performing on Top of the Pops, and that was when visually I got it. I saw a metal band, leather, crunching heavy riffs, you know, fist pumping sort of anthemic sound, and most importantly, a song about unity, because all the oddballs that were sort of gathering around this new wave of British heavy metal in the UK, we were literally oddballs. And later on you had Denim and Leather by Saxon, you had the Friday Rock Show. We were all part of a little thing and nobody knew who we were, and then suddenly Judas Priest do this, and I got this in April. I believe this came out April 1980. Now, what we talk, United is off the album British Steel. Now, British Steel is the album where Judas Priest consolidated their style. They brought in Dave Holland on drums, so they had a stable lineup. I'm going to talk about him in a little bit. Yes, and those of you who know, I will be talking about that. I thought I'd have a chat about this aspect because I've got my own little take on it. I'm getting there already. They brought Dave Holland in. It features classic records that were hit records like Breaking the Law and United. It's got some great songs. This is the thing about all styles of music. When you start looking at styles of music, in the end, it always comes back to the songs. Even progressive rock comes back to the songs. Even jazz rock fusion comes back to the Birdlands and Chameleons. There needs to be a tune, right? And this is where this is just such a classic heavy metal album, and it's almost Judas Priest the most strongest link between the heavy rock bands, hard rock bands of the early 70s, which we now call classic rock, and the new wave of British heavy metal. There's other bands involved in the mix like UFO, for example, Iron Maiden, Saxon to some extent, Scorpions, especially when early John Roth joined. But Judas Priest, more than any band, sort of carve out what it is. They are like the archetypal heavy metal band. Now, let's have a chat about Dave Holland, the late Dave Holland. So Dave Holland came in on drums. Before that, he'd been the drummer with Trapeze, one of the great power trios of the 1970s. He played on all these, and then he had differences with the band in about 1988, I think, and I think he left. Around about, when would it have been? Around about 2002, 2003, I got a phone call from Al Atkins. Now, Al Atkins was the original drummer with Judas Priest before Rob Halford, and they were getting a tour together to go off around the States, and Dave Holland was slated to do it, but Dave Holland suddenly wasn't doing it, and they rang me up, and I couldn't do it because I had a ton of work on, so I passed it on to a good friend of mine who went out on tour doing this tour. Now, at the time, I was working doing drum clinics, and I was doing drum clinics over at a drum shop in Northampton. And I went over and did a clinic over there with Thomas Lang. It was me and Thomas Lang, and we actually got into, I didn't, but the people around me, we got into a bit of a tussle and with the people who ran the shop. And it wasn't me, I agreed with the shop. It was actually, I had a dodgy manager, and he was like, getting a bit arsey. And so anyway, that was all going on. And then the guy that we'd had the tussle with was a guy called Brent, and he ran the shop, the late, great Brent. And he was a lovely guy. And we suddenly heard that he'd commit suicide, and there was something going on around that. What happened is that we found out that Dave Holland, the reason why he hasn't been on that tour was because he was involved in a case where he'd been accused of sexually abusing a disabled student that was 17 years old under his care. He went to court, he got imprisoned and went to prison. Now, at the time, this story was kept really quiet. Now the internet's emerged. I think Judas Priest fans have found that this happened, and it's still not common knowledge that this happened with Dave Holland. He did his time. He came out, and I think he died of lung cancer at the age of 69. More recently, there's been a guy. Now, I'm not saying that I know anything about this, but I thought on the channel I would want to put this out there to try and explain both sides of the story. So I explained the one side of the story as we understood it back then. But a guy's been working with KK Downing on a biography of KK Downing, and he's been contacted by a number of people. And there's been people contact him and claim that Dave Holland was involved in a blackmail, and this may have not happened. Now, if that is the case, Dave Holland has been, has gone to his grave with a great injustice. If it isn't the case, then these people who were sort of coming out and saying all this. And as I say, I know nothing about these people. It was in researching this video and actually reading up a little bit on British Steel that I sort of stumbled upon this sort of new information that some people have been stating this. Now, it's interesting because at the time when Dave Holland was involved with this and people were trying to contact him and he couldn't do the tour, he told somebody, and it came through me. Now, this might not be true, but it came through the grapevine, that he said he couldn't do it because he was involved in, he was being blackmailed. So I just want to put it out there. A discussion might emerge. I probably should be keeping my nose out, but I couldn't mention Judas Priest without stumbling into this area. So I've stumbled into it here. I have no inside information. I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't know what is the case. I am just reporting something that actually did happen to the best of my knowledge. If I have got anything wrong, I apologise profusely, but I wanted to put a little bit of interest in this video and explore this because Judas Priest are one of the greatest heavy metal bands of all time. Let's move on to number 5, shall we? So at number 5, we've got to discuss hair metal. And what's the greatest hair metal album? Well, it's actually it goes a little bit before heavy hair metal, I think, but this band is so important to heavy metal. It is, of course, Van Halen, and I'm, of course, going to put the first album in, which came out in 1978 or maybe 79. It was around about that period of time, just as the UK was moving towards the new wave of British heavy metal. We also had in the States this sudden shift where Van Halen came out and literally sold tens of millions of albums, became one of the biggest bands in the world. And they pushed with David Lee Roth this sort of showy, almost vaudeville approach that then was going to influence the 80s hair metal bands. But also it ushers in the age of the virtuoso guitar player that's they're going to inform bands like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and Racer X and Cacophony and all that type of stuff. I still can't get over this album. This album is a work of art. And Van Halen went on and made a whole series of brilliant albums. I think if I had my Desert Island Disc album, it would be 1984. Because at that point, they've refined whatever they do to an absolute... It's like intense Van Halen, with all the sort of David Lee Roth. Because David Lee Roth's one of the great front people of all time. I love his singing, and I think he does things with his voice that nobody else does. He's coming out of a tradition, though, that's so old. If you listen to his vocal style, it's really rooted, partly in Sinatra and those people, but going back further into people like Al Jolson. And this sort of showy commercialism balances Eddie Van Halen's incredible genius and troubled genius. He's got a vision, and he won't let go of it. And the tussles between, David Lee Roth's sort of commercial, let's just do cover versions and I can dance about and we'll dress up and do all that type of thing. And Eddie Van Halen's, I'm going to change the world of music, all under the banner of stuff that sold millions. They're an incredible band, Van Halen. And Van Halen 1 is the album you have to own. Even if you're not much of a fan of heavy metal, get it because it's so brilliant. Eruption, of course, is on there, the great big guitar solo. They do You Really Got Me by the Kinks. You've got, Ain't Talking About Love, Jamie's Cry, which is quite poppy. It's just a brilliant album. So that's what I've got at number 5. At number 4, I have, by Motörhead, Ace of Spades. As I was saying earlier, in 1980, I started to sort of follow the breadcrumbs from Rainbow, White Snake, to Judas Priest, and then Saxon, and then Motörhead. And when I heard Ace of Spades, it changed my life completely. Now, I've reported this so many times on this channel. What do I say about this? What can I say that I haven't said before? I absolutely love this album. It is AC/DC's greatest album. There is not one bad song on it. Now, what do AC/DC do? Not AC/DC. What do Motörhead do? They've got no AC/DC on here. Not heavy metal enough. And I'm probably, that Freudian slip of saying AC/DC is probably because I feel guilty. It would be Highway to Hell, of course. Maybe Power Age, actually. Power Age on there listed them essential heavy metal albums. But it's down at number 11. I mean, you can't have AC/DC down. Forget I said that. Let's talk about Motörhead. Obviously, Motörhead come out of Hawkwind, this sort of psychedelic prog. and this is really going back to sort of the garage rock and roll bands that came out of America in the 1960s, bands like MC5, and also eventually bands like the Ramones, which I've been critical of this channel. But of course, my hero Lemmy was a huge fan of the Ramones. When Lemmy exits Hawkwind, it's around about the time that punk's about to happen. Now, Lemmy, I don't think, spots what's going on and decides to move with the times. He's a natural rock and roller. And so he just forms a rock and roll band and he drops the psychedelia, although it's there in the early stuff. There's certain moments. So there's an early Motörhead track on one of the first albums, because they have albums come out in a funny order with this incredible violin playing, which is quite psychedelic and proggy. But as they sort of gain ground, the albums get better and better. You get Overkill, you get Bomber, and then when Ace of Spades come out, and I loved Iron Fist as well. Orgasmatron is incredible. A Perfect Day, is that the one with Brian Robertson? Great album. They're just on a roll, and they keep going. If you buy the last Motörhead albums, you know, once they've gone to a quartet, it's all brilliant stuff. All brilliant stuff. But Ace of Spades is the album. It's the album that changed my life. It seems to sit between heavy metal. It seems to sit between thrash metal, punk, and it's also got sort of allusions to Second World War and history. So it's got even this sort of like very British thing going about it, which I don't want to call is proggy, but it's allied to that. And I just love them. They were one of a kind. Nobody can not like Ace of Spades. I just love them. Right, at number 3, I have, to represent the new wave of British heavy metal, I've got Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. Again, I've spoken about this at length. Why Number of the Beast? Well, there's a part of me that wants to put Killers on. If I was having a Desert Island disc Iron Maiden album, and I could only take one, it would be Killers. I love the Paul Di'Anno version. This takes them closer to sort of the punk rock genre that was influencing heavy metal bands. Now, the thing with Iron Maiden, along with Diamond Head, they're that new wave of British heavy metal that's come out of prog. They're singing songs about wizards and singing songs about, you know, Vikings and all that type of stuff. Right, epic stuff. They're into the complexity of it. They're into the virtuosity of the playing. And Paul Di'Anno, however, has not got that sort of voice. He's not operatic and cannot do the stuff that primarily Steve Harris, because it's his band, that vision of what he's got. We love the Paul Di'Anno stuff because it takes you back to an earthier, punkier version of Iron Maiden. And on Killers, they just nail it. The production's better than the first album. They just nail it. But with the departure of Paul Di'Anno, because he couldn't do what they envisaged, and the acquisition of Bruce Dickinson, or as he was called when he first joined the band, Bruce, the operatic style creates an absolute genius album. And this is a genius album that, although it's like the definitive new wave of British heavy metal album, is virtually a progressive rock album. So we get that progressive rock, progressive metal, you know, because I've got no Dream Theater here, I've got no Rush. They're too out of the bounds of this thing. But I think we nail that with Number of the Beast at number 3. At number 2, the second greatest metal album in history, I've given it to, and I know this is going to be contentious, but I've given it a great lot of thought. I've given it to Master of Puppets by Metallica. Metallica have ended up being like the biggest band in history in the last like 30 years. They're the biggest band. They're household names. They have just, it's so insane that this style of music that was so obscure, and then the thrash metal bands that was obscure inside obscure, produced a band that started off as such a, you know, a no holds barred, no fuss, we're a metal band. Metallica. We're called Metallica, and we're a metal band. We don't do videos, we don't wear makeup, we don't do any of this. We don't, you know, we're just straight down the line. And they make this album, Master of Puppets, which is just such a pulling together. And I have to say it, the performance and the songwriting and the production just all comes together. This is a work of absolute genius. And really, if we were talking about the top 30 albums in history that are great, I would put Master of Puppets on here. It's absolutely brilliant. And we've got 2 albums. We've got the album at number 1. And I think if you were just to pick 2 heavy metal albums that you're going to have in your collection, it would be Master of Puppets and what I've got at number 1, which is, and I'm going to get there quick because I don't want this to be a really long video, is Paranoid by Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath invented heavy metal. Here in the Midlands, in Birmingham, they invented heavy metal. They passed the baton on to Judas Priest. Judas Priest passed it on to Diamond Head. Diamond Head, well, they're not quite from Birmingham, they're from Stourbridge, but don't matter. And then Stourbridge passes it on, you know, Diamond Head passes it on to Napalm Death. What a lineage, what a lineage. Black Sabbath. I am going to do a history of Black Sabbath. Normally when I talk about Black Sabbath, I go into a comedy thing and I extract a whole bunch of comedy. I'm not going to do that here because I really want to get across. I think they're a genius band and the chemistry between that band is incredible. They're one of those bands that when they go into the studio in 1969 and make that first album, which they do in 12 hours, they make the whole album, mixing and everything. It's done and finished in 12 hours. And they invent about 5 genres because they're not just inventing heavy metal, they're inventing stoner rock and they're expanding into like prog metal. They're doing everything on that first album, right? They just go in. It's pretty. I think there's 2 overdubs. They play it live, and I could have had the debut Black Sabbath album, but from then on they start to progress. Motörhead do not. Sorry, I get so confused today. Black Sabbath do not give up. They keep progressing. The first album sells. The critics say it's crap because they don't understand what's just happened to music. And 4 months after the release of the first album, they go back into the studio with hardly any material. And they make a better album. These tracks are written in the studio. Paranoid, which becomes their first hit single, goes to number 4 in the charts here in the UK, consolidating the band, changing the name of this album, which was originally going to be called War Pigs, to Paranoid, which is why they got that bloke jumping out of the forest in his pants and crash helmet with the sword. Don't make it down the comedy route. Let's keep this serious. It's astonishing. And Paranoid, just these tracks are improvised in the studio, and they're just so in the zone that music arrangement doesn't matter anymore. They can go any direction they want. And the genius in the arrangement of these tracks lays the foundation for heavy metal to have the freedom to do whatever it wants for the next 30, 40 years. It's a work of absolute genius. Now, from that point on, Master of Reality, production changes, the one that comes in afterwards. The production changes, the reverb goes, and you suddenly have this dry, heavy sound. That's grunge. Grunge wasn't invented by Nirvana or any of those bands. It's invented by Black Sabbath on Masters of Reality. On Volume 4, they're coked out of their heads. Now, this album, they're stoned out of their heads. And you know, you could hear that because it's got this loose and dubby sound. And when they're jamming, it's almost like some trippy psychedelic band. It's incredible. I used to love the jams of Black Sabbath when it's just Geezer Butler's incredible bass playing, bobbing away. And of course, Geezer Butler was a guitarist the same as Tony Iommi. And so when he was put onto the bass, he didn't know what to do. They're writing these incredible riffs. So he plays the riff on the bass in the same way that Tony plays it on the guitar, creating the sound. Led Zeppelin didn't do this. Deep Purple didn't do this. It creates the sound. Volume 4 is, like, for me, is the most idiosyncratic, like, nuclear physics of heavy metal. If you go and put it on, they're doing such strange things. There's so much experimentation going on. By the time you get to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, they're moving towards almost being like a progressive rock band. They go so far out, and then they have problems with their management. And when they get into the studio to record Sabotage, they pull back to the rock. And Sabotage is one of the most heaviest albums. And there was a part of me that wanted to put Sabotage at number 1 here. That's follows up after Sabotage, Technical Ecstasy, and then Never Say Die. Both very experimental albums, and I enjoyed them very much. And although they don't have the power of these early albums, what they do showcase is how brilliant and versatile this band was. This band was born out of the chemistry of these musicians together. But for me, it has to be Paranoid. That is a work of art. I've tried to go as fast as I can. I know I talk a lot. We've come in at 40 minutes, which I've managed to shave 10 minutes off my usual amount of time I do. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, please put a like on it. If you want to see some more, you can subscribe, ring the notification bell. What else could you do? If you want to support me, you can become a patron, you become a free member or a paid up member. I have a donation button now on my videos, and I have a PayPal tip jar. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year. I'll see you on the next video.
Well, I could talk about the rock. I tell you that now. I've been listening to it for 50 years. Yeah, man and boy, yeah, always been the rock. And I know them all. Know them all. Met them all. I met Ozzy, Tony. I met the guys from Zepp, from Uriah Heep, from Free. All of them. The best rock comes from Birmingham, though, doesn't it? Do you reckon? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Do you want me to tell you a bit about what rock is? I can tell you it right now. Right, I do get a bit irate though when I start talking about the rock because it's bloody rubbish now, isn't it? The music now, rubbish. Yeah, can't stick it. I can't. It's all bloody auto-tune, isn't it? Dancing around and they're rapping. Do you like rap? I bloody hate it. Gets right on my wicket. Does the bloody rock does anyway? But I'll tell you where rock comes from. It comes from Birmingham, right? Because it was invented in 1970 by Black Sabbath. Don't let anybody tell you anything else. All the other bands before that, they weren't even rock, especially the American ones. They're bloody rubbish. I've had a listen to them, like Iron Butterfly. They're all right. They got a good riff or two, but it ain't like the Sabbath, is it? I mean, that's something else. Black Sabbath invented heavy metal, and you know why? Because old Tony Iommi, he was working down the factory. My uncle used to work down the factory with him. It was a rough place, that was, yeah. Rough place in Birmingham back then. And he's working away. You're not going to bloody believe it, right? Because he was a good guitarist, so Tony was. Good guitarist, right? And he sticks his hands in one of the machines, he chops his bloody fingers off. And all his mates are saying, you've had it, mate. You have to give up the guitar. He said, I ain't going to bloody give up the guitar. He said, you're going to have to give up the guitar. He said, I ain't going to do it. I don't care what anyone says. He said, you're going to bloody have to can't play guitar with no fingers. He said, I'll find a way. He said, I'll find a way. And we all, I was just a youngster back then, you see. But my uncle said they were all laughing at him, Tony. But you don't want to laugh at Tony because his dad, right? His dad had like an ice cream van that used to go round, and you got to watch them ice cream vans because they can be a bit nifty. Those guys, you know, because they have to look after themselves because it's a hot day and people get a bit grumpy, don't they? They get down and they can have a can have a raspberry whip, and they'll go, oh, I ain't got a raspberry whip, mate. And he said, what you mean, an ice cream van? And he said, well, I haven't got one. He says, well, I'm bloody going to get angry then and give you a good old punch around the bracket. I will. The Iomis did mess with them. And because they're Italian, aren't they? Yeah, Italian. And they're a bit fiery, those Latin types, aren't they? Anyway, I digress. So, Tony Iommi's got no bloody fingers, right? And he says, I goes home, and I think, how could I make myself some fingers? But his mum was nagging him. And he's going, Tony, do the bloody washing up. God, I don't want to do the washing up. I've cut all my bloody fingers off. I'll get all the soapy water in my fingers. I might catch something that's not very nice. He says, don't be so bloody saft. Don't be so bloody saft. He told you, his mum said that to Tony Iommi, yeah. And he said, you'll do it now. Get yourself in there and start washing up all the dishes. We've had chips and mushy peas. You know what mushy peas are like? You don't mess the plates up, especially if you don't wash off straight away. It forms a hard crust, doesn't it? Like a hard crust across the plate, and then you got to scrape it off. And of course, Tony Iommi's mum didn't want that to happen to her plates. So she says Tony there, so he's putting the rubber gloves on because he don't want to get his fingers on the stumps. You don't want the stumps getting all like all like nasty, does he? So he's trying to get the old rubber gloves on, and he looks down, sees the bloody washing up liquid. Now this is a sign of genius. This is why Tony's a genius, right? Because he looks at that washing up liquid. Anyone else would just think bubbles, wouldn't they? Just think bubbles. That's all you're going to think, isn't it? Not him, because he was a clever bloke, old Tony was. He saw fingers, plastic fingers, and somehow, and I don't know how, whether it's just because he'd grown up in such an industrious city as Birmingham. I don't know if that was what it was, growing up in this industrious city. But he thinks, I can make some plastic fingers out of them. You know what he did? He bloody did it, right? And then because he got plastic fingers, that's the secret of heavy metal, because you can only really play heavy metal with plastic fingers. Now, old Ozzy Osbourne, right? Ozzy, he was like, my uncle knew him as well. He was a bit of a bad lad, really. I mean, he was saft and bad because he's always like doing bloody burglaries, walking around barefoot. He was quite a strange one, but he was into his singing. But no one would have had him in a band. But I do believe that he acquired, and when I say acquired, you know what I mean? He acquired some sort of PA. And so Tony Iommi got him in the band, right? And they were all horror movie fans. We all were horror movie fans. If you remember Birmingham, we like a bit of horror, we do, yeah. And he went out and he saw something like a hammer, and he saw this. They said, "Well, let's name the band after that." So they called it Black Sabbath. Nobody called a band like that, you know. They got old Bill Warded, you know, on drums. He good drummer he was, and they got that. Geezer Butler, yeah, Geezer Butler. And Geezer Butler's a funny one, right? Because he's a vegan. Yeah, he's a vegan. He don't eat meat. Can you that much how Safan he's not eating meat when you're in Black Sabbath? I mean, old Ozzy Osbourne, he's eating bats, isn't he? He's eating, I mean, that bloke Saft, he is, I tell you that now. But he's done all right, hasn't he? He's done all right for himself, I've got to give him that. But Geezer, he was a vegan, he was more sensitive in time, so he gets to the bass, he says, if you want someone to write the lyrics, I'll be writing your lyrics for you. And Tony and Geezer and Ozzy, they look at each other, they go, well, that sounds all right, you know, you all right writing a few lyrics? He says, yeah, what do you want to write about? And he says, oh, I don't know, really, I might write a little bit about, I don't know, maybe nuclear war, or maybe the devil. And they went, oh, that sounds good, that does. I think that sounds right. Good, you should do a bit of that then. And so he did. And that's how Black Sabbath were formed. And there you have all the elements required, to create heavy metal. And it was created in Birmingham right here. Yeah. But not just that. We made up loads of stuff as well. I mean, you get old Robert Plant and John Bonham, they went in Led Zeppelin, didn't they? And they were pretty heavy, yeah. There's quite a few heavy bands around Birmingham at that time, I'll tell you that. But I'll tell you who the heaviest drummer was. Bloody Bev Bevan from ELO. He was back in the move back then. They weren't that heavy, but I'll tell you something. Bev was heavy. And when he hooked up with the ELO guys, right? We got Jeff Lynne. Jeff Lynne, he was a good songwriter. And he sort of took Geezer Butler under his wing, he did, yeah. And so Geezer would give him a phone call when he was writing a song. He'd ring him up and say, like, you imagine this, he's like, say you got like Geezer on the phone and he's trying to work on a song and he's thinking, oh, I've got no inspiration. Maybe I got to give Jeff a ring and see what he says. So he rings up Jeff, doesn't he? Right, you know. And Jeff answers the phone. Who's this, mate? He says, Geezer. Oh, you're right, mate. He said, yeah, I'm fine, mate, but I'm writing a song. He said, what's it about? He goes, well, I thought I'd write a song about a man that was turned to steel in a great big magnetic field. And Jeff says, what do you want to write something like that for? That's a bit saft in it. And he says, no, I thought it'd be quite good for a song. And Jeff turns around and says, why don't you write a song about the weather? You know, or something nice and happy to cheer people up. And Geezer says, I don't want to cheer people up. I want to get them all depressed and frightened. I want them to get them scared. I want them to be frightened about, you know, like a great big, some bloke who's made out of iron. Yeah, iron. That's what he's made out of. You're not made out of skin like a normal person. And Jeff says, you bloody saft, you are. I mean, what you want to do is talk about how you've got up one day and it's nice and sunny and you go outside and you go, hello, Mr. Blue Sky. You know how we do in Birmingham. We always put Mr. on the beginning of everything, you know. It's like, you know, when you get up in the morning, you go, where's my slippers? Well, you wouldn't be looking for your slippers in the morning, would you? You know, but say you were going to bed and you're trying to find your slippers and you're looking all over the place. You can't find them, can you? And then when you find them, you say a little joke to yourself, don't you? You go like, hello, Mr. Slippers. You know, like that, Mr. Slippers. That's what I call my slippers. Do you call your slippers that? He said to Geezer. Geezer's like, no, I don't wear slippers, mate. Don't wear slippers at all. I'll just go straight to bed. I've got a nice pair of pyjamas. And then Jeff goes, like, so imagine that then. Imagine you can't find your pyjamas. It wouldn't happen, mate, because I always stick it under the pillow. He said, is that what you do in your pyjamas? Yeah, always got it. I'm as regular as clockwork with my pyjamas. We don't get up in the morning. I take my pyjamas off. I fold them into a nice, neat pile. And then I place them Very. I place them underneath my pillow. I'm the sensible one in Black Sabbath. You see, Ozzy, he don't bloody wear pajamas now. He just gets in bed with what he's got on. He does. And Tony Iommi, God knows what he wears, because he's always inventing stuff. But he does have a little rack for his plastic fingers. It's next to the bed. Looks bloody horrible. And then you can see him lying in there in bed with his stumps. I don't like it. But now I stick my pajamas underneath the pillow. That's what I do. And he said, so well, imagine right, that you try to find your pajamas, right, and you can't find them. You're looking everywhere, right, geezer. You know what I'm saying. You can't go to bed without pajamas. I'm not going to get in bed with my pants on, am I? Because that's going to be bloody horrible. It's like, what happens when you got your pants on. It's like, if you've got an itchy bum, you keep scratching your bum, don't you? You wake up the next day when you get a smelly finger. We don't want that to happen. So, if you've had them with your pajamas, you know exactly what to do. Just stick them straight in the wash, get them washed up, get them on the dryer on the line outside, and then when they're dry, stick them back onto your pillow. But imagine you couldn't find them, you'd be worried, wouldn't you? And you said, "I bloody would be, yeah, if I couldn't find my pajamas before going to bed, that'd be bloody awful." And say you couldn't find them, you might say to yourself, when you do find them, well, how am I going to find them? Where were they? I don't know. Maybe they just got dropped down behind the back of your cupboard. If they're down by the back of the cupboard, I know where they are, don't I? Well, no, you wouldn't have known what they are, but I would have if they dropped down the back of the cupboard. That's the first place I'd bloody look. So I wouldn't need to look for them. I know where they are. No, you wouldn't, mate. I'll tell you something now. You wouldn't. Anyway, imagine this. Imagine if you found him, look down. What you're going to say to yourself is bloody obvious, isn't it? You're going to say, "Hello, Mister Pajamas." Is it Mr. Pajamas? He said, that sounds like a children's character, doesn't it? Or it's like Mr. Bojangles, is it Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Pajamas? It sounds like some sort of pussycat, that does, Mr. Pajamas. Hello, Mr. Pajamas, what are you? I'm a pussycat, yeah? Anyway, so these conversations between Geezer and Jeff, they didn't usually work out that well, but they did go on, and I'll be telling you about them all, because really, if you find out about this, you will find out and know the secret of how heavy metal and heavy rock, we used to call it heavy metal, but everything we called heavy metal back in the day, now heavy metal's all that screaming stuff. I don't mind it so much. It's all right. It's all bloody right. But it ain't like a bit of Uriah Heep, is it? Or a bit of Sabbath. I bloody love them. All the bands, right, down in Starbridge, my old mate Brian Tatler, he had Diamond Head, yeah. They invented the new wave of British heavy metal. Everyone thinks it's all made, but it was a bloody old Brian, wasn't it? It was Brian, he was the one who did it, and they're a good band. No, I made, I like them. I might tell you a little bit like them. And then some of the new bands that come out, like Metallica. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about the new bands like Metallica. But it'll be mainly the old bands, like the classic rock bands, the ones who built rock. That's who I'm going to tell you about. There's a whole bloody load of them. And I ain't going to be telling you about all these bloody rubbish American ones. But there's some of them all right. Little Skinny's okay. ZZ Top's all right. I do like them. I might tell you about them anyway. I'm the man. I thought you'd introduce yourself and just tell you how heavy metal began. So it began in Birmingham. Just you lot bloody remember that, yeah? Okay. All right, mates. I'll tell you what, I'm going to sign off now. And I'm going to go, I fancy go down on Greg's. Because we had some bloody rioting we did here last week. I thought, what the hell bloody hell's this? Everyone was smashing stuff up. So, I went down and I got a couple of sausage rolls from Greg's. And it's nice to get a bit of stuff for free, but you can't always get it for free, can you? So I think I should put my hand in my pocket and go down and perhaps make up for me little criminal activity last week by, I'll go down and maybe get a sausage roll, jam donut, because I do like that. Yeah, I'm getting a bloody cup of coffee there, though. I'll tell you, it's expensive. So, but he puts the price right up when you have a cup of coffee. What I tend to do, right, is I get like the sausage roll and I get the jam donut, and then I put them in the bag and try and get home as quick as I can, because they're never that hot at Greg's, are they? If you get a hot one, you're being bloody lucky. But it's sort of lukewarm, so I try and get home, and then when I get home, I make myself a cup of coffee. Yeah, it's a tip for you out there in music land. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Nice to see you all. My name is Aged Brummy Rocker, and I'll be on here telling you a bit about the rock. Cheers. Cheers, chaps. See you soon, mates.